Alright, we're gonna try this video one more time. This is the most cursed video that I've ever had to make because I've done it so many times. It's getting kind of ridiculous. Why does the mouse only show up sometimes? Anyway, so I'm going to go back to making some videos for this channel. Hopefully this is going to come out with a couple of other videos. This one's just an aside video. And we're going to be going to just talking with the PowerPoint slides and not printing everything out so you don't have to see my hands or whatever. And also my camera's running out of, the battery's rubbish. So anyway, we'll do this. But the problem with me doing this is every single time I try to make it, something mucks up. Like I don't record the sound or I don't record something. But anyway, let's just get into this. So this is talking about the problem with rubbish and recycling and how that, at least where I live, the current approach is just ridiculous. It doesn't work, and that there's a much better way of doing it, and it's shockingly simple. And I've heard people say this, and I really just want to say I wish we did this. So we'll go in. So the problem is recycling, I feel, is probably rubbish. Like recycling is probably making things worse rather than better. And the first thing to remember is that we pay for recycling, which seems weird. I remember that was a Penn and Teller person. They made a comment about they were right libertarian sort of thing. It's like, well, why do we have to pay for recycling? Why do we have to if it was such a good thing, shouldn't they be paying us to do this? And we're going to come back to that. And the thing is, even though we get we have our recycling bins and we chuck all our recycling in the bin and we sort it all out and it gets taken off. I mean, I don't actually know how much of that is actually getting recycled very well. It's probably just getting burnt or buried half the time, shipped off to another country where that happens. Or it's only being recycled for a select number of items. Like, if I put in most plastics, then they probably just end up as clothes pegs or something. They don't turn up as the thing that I originally bought. Maybe in PET bottles you get that kind of thing, but you still have to have mostly some fresh material in each PET bottle. But it makes us feel good about that, right? I mean, the thing is, the average person thinks that they've been good for the environment because they recycle. And I think you might think, well, surely that's a good thing, right? It should be good to recycle. But the problem is that if you're not really recycling into the things that you originally were, the item that originally was. So like if you buy your number 5 thing and it gets turned into clothes pegs or whatever, then you're still using fresh plastic every time you buy stuff. But it makes us feel like it's okay to use plastics. And recycling glass is a costly, environmentally expensive thing. But we feel okay about it because we are recycling. And so we might actually end up using more plastic than we would otherwise. So when I was a kid, we would give the glass bottles back to the milk person, and they would go off and they would get washed at a factory and then returned and used again and again. Maybe that's not the best solution, but the point is that once we became happy with using plastic, we started using plastic when we didn't before. So we're not looking for other alternatives because we feel okay doing recycling. And the thing is, it's a cost that we forget. So I think the primary problem with all of this is that we forget that we're paying for rubbish when we buy something. So if I buy an item from a shop, we forget that at the end of that lifetime, there is a cost to disposing of that item. If I buy a couch, one of these days, I'm going to have to get rid of it. I may actually have to take it to the tip and pay a certain amount of money for them to take it away. I may have to get someone to pick it up. Or things like this. The same with all items that we have. And the thing is, quite often people don't want to pay or they can't pay, so they just dump it. And so you have this extra cost where you have to clean things up from people dumping things. Somebody else has to pay for its removal. It's basically a market failure. And it's a market failure because we're not paying the cost of the removal when we buy things. So we're not making a rational choice about things when we're buying things because we're not including the full cost. And of course there are other negative costs with an item that comes with the disposal, and that they might just be the negative cost of that thing being created in the first place or over its lifetime. So not at the point of creation, but over its lifetime. You could argue things like petrol fall in this as well. Like if I buy petrol, I haven't damage the environment until I burnt it in my car. So this is going to be a similar kind of mechanism to how you might do the same kind of things with like items like petrol. The thing is, we're not making rational choices when we buy items. So how do we do this? We're going to, my answer, because I kind of go for market-based solutions, not because I'm a right libertarian, but because I like the idea that if you can, the market is a good way of doing it because it doesn't have a central control. It can't be so easily co-opted. If we had this is big if the market was set up properly, and quite often the markets are not set up properly and they do not give very good solutions. So how can we fix the rubbish and recycling market? Well, this is quite shockingly simple. All we have to do is we charge the negative costs of an item at the time of production or importing. And what I mean by that is that, so the cost of disposal of an item is paid when the item is created or when the item is imported into a country. So here I'm saying negative costs, I mean kind of general here. So these will be the costs of disposal, the costs to the environment, or what we have to displace. So part of that is disposal. Like if I have to build a tip, then I'm paying, hopefully maybe I've paid some environmental costs, some costs to subsidize the harm that I've done to the environment by building that. So you want to put in these costs wherever you can, because people should be paying these up front. And I'm going to argue that that creates a better, more healthy society when you do these kind of things, and people aren't going to be disadvantaged by this. But there are also health costs. This is more obvious with things like petrol, but maybe with like to break down, like maybe, I don't know, car tires. I don't know how hard it is to recycle car tires or do something with car tires, but you would assume that there are at least some things for which the process of converting them into something, reusing them or to dispose of them somehow incurs some costs on the environment and on people's health. Maybe they produce something in the air that has some long-term effect over a population or something like this. So I don't know if these things are happening, but I'm just saying you can put all of these things in together and then you can solve this problem all in one go. It's the same kind of framework. So how might this work? So it's really simple. You can put a levy on the extraction of raw material. So if you want to focus on trees, every time you chop down a tree, basically you need to pay into some sort of fund a cost that will be used to then dispose of that wood at the end of its lifetime. So maybe it's not when you chop the tree down. You may process the tree, and then you may take the leftover bits. I don't know what they call it, slag or something, when they chop the trees down. This is a slightly different thing. You kind of have to make sure people tidy up their mess when they chop down trees. But the point is, you can take it at whatever point. So they might take all the leftover bits from the tree before they made the planks, and then they may at that point, the tree choppers may then pay for the cost of disposal of the waste bits, or convert it to plywood or something. And then you're only doing it on the planks. But at some point, when you've got something that at that point of production, its cost of disposal hasn't been paid, then you have to have you're paying into a fund to eventually pay for its disposal. So you could do this with items mined, so planks of wood, and also you'd have to do this by imports. So anything you import into a country will have to be disposed of at some point. So you could do that by weight, or you could be more specific for more hazardous materials. So when you import things, which will look like a tariff, but it's not a tariff as such, it's just the cost that you're paying to dispose of things. I mean, the problem with all of these things is everybody will argue it's this or that or whatever. And this will, of course, have an effect on the market. This will reduce the demand for certain items. So I'm not saying it's not, but it's a justified thing. It's not like I'm introducing what I would say is dead weight loss in the market or something like this. I'm going to argue that this is actually paying for a service that needs to be paid for and putting it at the point where the market will work. So I'm not arguing here we'll go on to the next thing before I say what I'm not arguing on to. So this levy will be paid into a central fund. So at any point of production, maybe in the end it turns out that this has to be charged for the people who make like sofas and not the people who make wood. But I would try and keep it as early in the production process as possible. That levy is paid into a central fund, which will be managed by the central government or whoever. And so that fund is basically a trust fund, which would pay for the cost of disposal. So whenever an item is taken to some place to be disposed of, it's already being paid. So they would sort of like file, it's like, okay, well, we dispose of this much wood we need, and then you would be paid out of the levy, out of the fund, out of the central fund, to pay for that sorts of things. So there would be like a central buyer of disposal, which should hopefully keep the prices fair and at a good sort of level. So for the user though, for the everyday person who is taking the item to be dumped or is getting collected in a roadside collection, it's free. It doesn't cost anything because that's already being paid when they bought it. So people are still paying for the cost of disposal. They're just paying for it when it is created. So even though it doesn't look like it's like we're saying no, it's the sofa maker who is paying this thing. Well, the sofa maker is passing that cost on to the end user, right, or onto the retailer who passes it on to the end purchaser. So the wood producer has to pay a levy because they produced all this wood that's going to have to be disposed of. And then they're going to pass that cost on to the sofa maker, and then the sofa maker will pass that cost on to the retailer, and the retailer will pass that cost on to the end user. So, and with normal market sort of provisions, where sometimes the producers will absorb some of that cost. I'm not going to go into basic economics, but basically at the end, it's being passed on to the consumer. And we can also include into this cost the cost to transport, to pay for picking up items. So, you might want to have items picked up. So you could refund that money. So you could have like in the levy, it's going to have 10% of the levy is the cost for a truck to come pick it up and take it to the tip. But if you take it to the tip yourself for some reason, and it's easier for you, you could get that part refunded to you. So you could sort of have these two ways. You're really trying to encourage people to keep the streets clean, right? So you want to make it as easy as possible to dispose of items, and you want that cost up front as much as possible. And what would this be? All right, we're going one more thing. Apparently it's more than an art. So obviously the exact cost is going to be difficult to calculate. You don't know, like it might not be that much. You might say, well, this is how much it costs to dispose of wood. We can put it in this hole, and we can chop it up into little bits of wood chips, and then we can decompose it over a certain amount of time, and then we can turn it into soil or something at the end of it. We can't do that with metal, but some things, like if we import things, it's going to be made up of a whole bunch of different materials. We don't know how they're going to work. I'm going to come back to recycling though. So if you're thinking, well, wait, recycling, how does this come into it? We'll get to there in a second. So this obviously will cause a change, right? Because there is a change in the cost of the items you buy. So brand new items are going to cost more. What if the behavior is causing a change in cost? So plastic in the waterways. I don't really know what I mean by the next thing. So initially you might have some of the costs to include cleaning up things like plastic in the waterways, but that might change over time because you might end up putting less plastic in the waterways because now you're taking your item. So you have to have an assumption that people are not going to dispose of things always responsibly. That every bit of item that you create is not going to end up back in the tip where it can be, to the best of our abilities, disposed of. Some people are just going to let their plastic blow away in the wind. Some of their plastic bottles are just going to end up in the stream or whatever. So you have to have a cost which is going to cover, for example, cleaning up streams or keeping things out of streams or keeping things off the streets. So street cleaning costs are going to be part of this. But over time, you might that cost might change because less plastic is ending up in the waterways. So you'll have to adjust things as you go. So it's an art. This is not. I'm not trying to offer up how exactly you would cost everything, but this is the framework you need to be using. So similar materials, petrol products, you could include a levy for the health and environmental effects from burning. And a levy for the approximate amount not burnt but needing to be. So you don't. I broke my car a long time ago. I have petrol that I have to get rid of. I'd like to be able to get rid of that easily. It's kind of difficult. So you might have a little bit of part of that levy for disposing of that kind of stuff. But so this is a slightly different thing, but it's the same kind of idea. Like, this is what you should be doing. Like, people die from air pollution, and that comes from burning certain types of products. It also comes from like factory stuff. When you produce and you do certain production things, you're putting stuff into the air, which has a health effect on the population nearby. It also includes things like tires. When you drive your car around, you're wearing down tires. There are health and environment effects from that, which I forgot to mention earlier, and that should be part of the initial levy, trying to pay for the public healthcare costs of things, paying for initiatives to try and clean up anything that you have on that. So the good thing about this is most people, well, the thing about a general market is that we don't have any direct interaction with the levy. So we just buy things from the shop. It never comes into the average consumer's understanding of things. So I think I've gone through a lot of these before. So what would the effects of this? So new materials would cost more to buy because they're going to include this levy. But the important thing here is that recycling does not attract the extra levy. So suddenly the market will change. We'll say, well, look, we have a plastic bottle. We could recycle it, and it might cost a certain amount. It might cost slightly more than using raw materials by default. But if the raw materials now include this levy, it may become more economical to recycle things. So you're kind of shifting the emphasis to be on the recycling, because recycling itself is not going to include. You don't get any new levies if you're taking an existing material and reusing it for something else. Of course, the process itself may have some negative externalities. It might produce some environmental effects. It might require some other raw resources to use, and so there may be some costs in there. But the idea is that recycling will become relative to fresh production, become cheaper, even though recycling itself isn't changing its price so much, other than the fact that if you increase the amount of recycling you're doing, there might be a market, there might be economies of scale effect. So the idea is this would shift towards valuing recycled materials, but I'm not paying for recycling because it's just you want to recycle because it's cheaper than using fresh resources, because you're not having to pay for the disposal levy, because that's already being paid. So you can take one item and you can reuse it over and over and over and over again, and eventually it will end up in a tip, or eventually it will end up being disposed. But that cost would have been paid long time ago and put into a fund that was hopefully well managed and has kept its value over time relative to inflation. And so the end idea is this gives you an incentive to reuse things. It gives you an incentive to recycle things, but it's in a way that makes sense without you having to know if it makes sense, right? So I don't have to really understand if I'm doing things properly, because I know that as long as I just follow the market, it will work. Because if I'm saying, well, this thing has a lot of negative effects on the environment, should I recycle or not? Well, the market will tell you this, right? Because buying something brand new of that kind of thing is going to cost way more than buying the recycled version. So the recyclers will want to take your old items and recycle them again because it will be cheaper than using the fresh thing because of this levy. So there will be much less incentive to dump, so you get nicer, cleaner environments and nicer, cleaner looking streets because it's free, right? You just phone up somebody and they come and pick up whatever you have, and then and they will take it away. You don't have to take it to your nearest stream and throw it off a bridge. You can just do it and it doesn't cost anything, right? Because it's already being paid for. And so, why have I got more incentive to clean up? Well, I don't know. But anyway, so exporting could be handled. We've got to talk about exporting just a second. So we could handle it in another way. We could just ignore it. We could just say, well, you paid the levy. We're going to keep that and we'll pay it for some other environmental issues. People probably won't like that. You could refund that to the exporter. So you could say, well, I'm going to refund part of the levy because it was paid for disposal in New Zealand, or that's where I am, or in the country that you're in. But you're not going to have it in this country, so we'll refund you that part, and it can go off. And if it happens to come back into the country again, then you'll be charged again that cost, so it will come back to the fund. And of course, if other countries are doing the same kind of process, you may have an agreement to transfer that levy to another country, so that for their waste management. So you're transferring it around, and if that would then affect how things are imported. So when you import things, again, you wouldn't be paying an extra levy because the country you were importing from had already paid that levy, and they will transfer that money directly to the fund in the country that you're in. So the fund in country A will transfer the money to the fund in country B if you're importing from country A to country B, and so on and so on. It's probably the ideal way, but of course you've got the problem is that not all countries are going to have the same kind of agreement in place. So now recycling is more valuable as it's not attracting a levy. And so the levies might be quite high, right? And in fact, you could just put an extra levy on and use that as for other incentives to like clean up the environment, clean up previous damage might be included as part of the incentive. And so that the future things are actually quite expensive for quite a while we're cleaning up the mess we've already made. And I might say that this is, I'll come back to that. And so the user, of course, may get paid to return items. So this is a thing that happens already, right? If you can take plastic bottles back and you get 5 cents or something, or 10 cents for returning them. People have tried this, right? Because they've paid that 5 or 10 cents when they bought when they got the plastic. So we've already done this kind of things. It's just that we should be doing this for everything as much as possible. So the thing is also it encourages. So I mean, I guess the problem here is it doesn't encourage consumerism as such, but it does encourage different types of services, because now repairing is more encouraged, because raw materials and fresh items are more expensive than they were beforehand. They are going to go up in price, but repairing things is not going to go up in price, and using second-hand things is not going to go up in price. So you get the sort of thing where there's a greater economic incentive to repair things. So the problem, of course, is we don't repair things so much because it's so cheap just to buy new pieces of stuff that we bought cheaply in the first place, because things can be produced because the end costs are not being properly factored into the initial price that we're paying. But of course, you could argue it's anti-consumerist. It's not encouraging people to buy new items. It's encouraging people to reuse and repair things over creating new items. But I would argue, well, yes, but repairing and reusing, those are new potential businesses and entrepreneurial things that you can do in new enterprises that replace the construction thing. So it's not like, doesn't need to, I mean, I will argue in other videos that this obsession with the economy is a bit of a problem, but it's just shifting things around. So, but at the end of the day, it's like, well, I will argue it here. It's like if your economy is built on people. If people need to eat because they have to buy stuff that hurts the environment and they didn't really need, then you've got something wrong, right? If with your economy. So I think this is encouraging a better form of economy. And of course, it can be very tricky to get the levies correct. I'm not making any claim here about how easy this would be. I'm just saying this is what you should be working towards. And it's very politically loaded. I mean, people will always argue that, this will be seen as a tariff, for example. Apparently, tariffs are exciting for some people. I generally do not like tariffs. I do not see this as a tariff. I see this as a cost cost for a service that you're paying for, and you're paying for that you need to pay for, because it's a cost. You're trying to put in the actual cost of production, and the cost of production should include the cost of disposal for everything to work properly within a market. So as opposed to a trade tariff, which is put in place specifically to encourage local trade over foreign trade, which I'm not going to argue for. But of course, if you do see it, if it is argued as for a tariff, it becomes politically difficult sometimes to do this. If you have free trade agreements with some countries, they may say, well, look, you're just putting a tariff on things. You can't do that. So you will have to go through and renegotiate, I would think, trade agreements to do this. So anyway, thanks for that video. Hopefully this actually recorded this time, 26 minutes. Anyway, thanks for watching. And the next one, I think there'll be a couple of AI videos, and I think one about healthcare. I'm not too sure. Anyway, thanks for watching. Bye.